We're going to update our report on the potential dangers of those high-tech aluminum bats that are being used in amateur baseball. But first, a taste of something called quad rugby. Contrary to popular thought, the term quadriplegic needn't be applied only to those who are completely paralyzed in both arms and both legs. The word actually can be applied to anyone with at least some degree of reduced function in all four limbs. That's an important distinction for a group of men who play the rough-and-tumble sport of quadriplegic rugby. As Frank DeFord reports, it's not a game for the faint of heart.
Mark Zupan is a member of the U.S. national team for a sport called quadriplegic rugby. Well, that's the nice name for it. Zupan and his teammates call it Murderball. And it's easy to see why. The sport is so violent. I don't think most people expect that from guys in wheelchairs.
No, it's funny. You get people, new kids that come out and their parents come and watch. They're like, oh, don't hit him, don't hit him. But as they watch and they learn, they're like, come on, hit him harder, hit him harder. And I think that's the allure to it. It's the contact.
It's basically kill the man with the ball with some rules. So it's 4-on-4 on a basketball court.
Filmmakers Henry Rubin and Dana Shapiro have been following the U.S. national quad rugby team for the past 3 years during the production of a documentary.
All of the players are ranked between 0.5 and 3.5 depending on their function. The cumulative score of a team cannot exceed 8.
The highest score being the ones who have the most mobility.
Right, so a 3.5 is the ball handler, and the 0.5 and the 1s they have longer chairs, they're defensive. They just get in the way of the bigger guys.
It's played on a basketball court. You have 10 seconds to get the ball in bounds, 15 seconds to get over half court. You have to bounce the ball or pass every 10 seconds.
And scoring is simple. You cross between two cones in possession of the ball. Quad rugby was developed in Canada in the 70s. It's played in 36 countries now and has grown into the most popular sport at the Paralympic Games.
These guys are bonded not only by the sport, but by their injury. Like, they are part of a subculture. They definitely have this kind of look out for one another attitude. They call it a brotherhood.
And these guys are every bit as rowdy as any other athletes.
Shut up! Where do you want to go? No, not...
Zupan and his fellow players spend their free time playing practical jokes, partying, talking about women.
At this camp, I heard Sam say he doesn't like Ted.
Talking to women. And in case you wondered, yes, they can perform sexually.
You know what's funny? That is a question that people won't ask, but they sit there and they're like, wait a minute. He can't do that. Then they'll finally loosen up and ask, and then you just say, yeah, it's probably going to be one of the better times you'll ever have. And then they're sitting there, and they'll go, wait a minute here.
My trunk's paralyzed him to about right here.
Scott Hogsett was injured during a fist fight when he was thrown over a balcony.
Like, everyone's like, what's your approach, Scott? How do you work these women? Man, I'm like, the more pitiful I am, the more the women like me.
In fact, the degree to which these players lead normal lives seems remarkable until you listen to them.
And people will come up to me and they'll shake my hand and say, oh, it's good to see you out. And I look at them like, good to see me out. You know, like, where am I supposed to be, in a closet hanging out?
Andy Cohn broke his neck in a car accident when he was 16.
I'll be at the grocery store loading the groceries into my car, and people and then I go to get my car, and like, well, do you need help in your car? It's like, well, I wouldn't have come to the grocery store if I couldn't get back in my car.
I've gone up to people, start talking shit, and they're like, oh, I go, what, you're not going to hit a kid in a chair? You can hit me. I'll hit you back.
If Mark Zupan seems unaffected by his injury, the man who caused it was devastated.
It was a pretty innocent night. We just won a soccer game, and we went out to a bar, kind of drank and did whatever. I ended up leaving the bar, passing out in my buddy's pickup.
He left the bar dead stinking drunk, too, got in the truck and passed out in the bed liner.
Chris Igo was Zupan's best friend and had no idea that Zupan was in the back of his truck.
So I left the bar, got in my truck, had no idea it was there, and I lost control of the truck.
He spun out, threw me out of the back of the pickup truck, over some trees, into a canal. And I saw my legs. My legs were laying on top of each other, not normal.
Chris Igo, he must have been devastated when he found out.
It had to be very, very difficult. Every time he sees me, he has to go, oh, look.
The psychological aftermath of the accident tore the friendship apart, and at times the two men have gone years without speaking. But 9 years ago, Zupan started playing quad rugby at the club level, and he made the national team 3 years ago. It was a team that had been dominated until 2000 by Joe Soares, the man generally considered to be America's best quad rugby player ever, and a thorn in Mark Zupan's side.
Yeah, anytime, big boy.
What comes to your mind when I say Joe Soares?
He's not coming over for Thanksgiving dinner.
I have no problems with Mark Zupan. You know, I don't think he's going to come over for Thanksgiving.
Joe Soares is like quad rugby's version of John McEnroe, Ron Artest, and Bobby Knight, all rolled into one. The U.S. national team won 11 straight international competitions, and Joe Soares was the undisputed leader of the Americans throughout the 1990s. But as great a player as Soares might have been, as the Sydney Olympics approached, he was growing older and, it seems, slowing down. Still, he remained as outspoken, even obnoxious as ever. And some members of the U.S. team began to grumble that a diminished Soares was not worth having around.
If Joe was on the side of the road on fire, I wouldn't piss on him to put it out.
What was he like as a player?
He whines a lot, expects calls, and we kind of didn't hit it off real well to start out with.
Oh, boy.
I was punk-ass Zupan. He was, I don't even know what the hell he was. He was just not liked very often.
Yeah, baby, yeah!
At the tryouts for the U.S. national team in 2000, Soares' world fell apart. He claims his performance was as strong as ever. But even so, he was cut from the team that he dominated for so long. A victim, he says, of coaching favoritism. You feel betrayed?
At that time, I did. At that time, I felt like something that I've worked for all my life. Someone came into my house and took it away from me.
Soares thinks that he was screwed.
He got outplayed.
He got outplayed?
Yeah.
What you're suggesting, Mark, is that this is not just your opinion, that this was a consensus opinion.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody said, oh, poor Joe got screwed.
No, not at all.
Except for Joe.
Except for Joe.
Soares was so upset by his dismissal that he actually filed an appeal to the Quad Rugby Governing Board, but it was turned down. Without Soares, the Americans won the gold medal in the Sydney Paralympics, continuing their unbeaten streak. Joe Soares, meanwhile, packed his bags and defected to the enemy, Canada, to serve as its coach.
Canada! Yeah! They needed a coach, and they knew that I had a lot of knowledge in the game, and they took a chance.
How about revenge? Was that a factor?
That's a tough question. I was motivated, let's put it that way.
And get ready for USA in the finals.
Joe Soares prepped his Canadian charges for the 2002 World Championships, which would be held in Sweden.
USA, learn a new way.
The U.S. and Canadian teams fought their way to a meeting in the gold medal game. It was Joe Soares facing off against his former team. You think you got in their heads? You're sitting there and they're looking across and they're seeing their old teammate. You think maybe that got them?
At that time, I wanted them to hate me as much as they could. Hate me, don't hate my team. Hate me. And at that time, I think I was successful at that.
Well, you were Benedict Arnold.
Of course. That's enough to hate someone.
Head up! Head up!
With Soares nearly berserk on the sideline, the Canadians played the Americans even, taking the lead with just seconds remaining. Joe Soares was accomplishing what had never been done before. He was beating the mighty Yanks. The buzzer goes off. How did you feel?
Terrific.
Vindicated?
Yes.
Why did you feel vindicated?
Mission accomplished with Team Canada. That was number one. Second of all, to win the gold medal, you got to beat one team. That team happened to be USA.
Mark Zupan, meanwhile, was devastated. Still coming into his own as a player, Zupan had played throughout the tournament, but never even got into the gold medal game. You didn't play in the game.
I didn't.
The team loses.
Yep.
And it loses to a guy coaching in a team that you didn't like.
Yep.
altogether pretty miserable?
Yeah, I mean, it's salt in the wound. It's kind of like, great.
Joe Soares hoped his success in Canada would translate into an offer to coach his old U.S. team. He applied for the job this past year, but was rejected.
I wouldn't have played.
You would not have played?
I would not have played. I would not have played.
A lot of the U.S. players said straight up that they would not play if Joe coached. And that, I can't imagine that's not a factor when the board is making the decision.
Okay, open it up now!
As for Mark Zupan, he's developed into the U.S. team's leader and spokesman. And best of all for him, after years of limited contact with his friend Chris Igo, the man responsible for his spinal injury, the friendship has been repaired.
We joke around, and I'm like, so, you made me, didn't you? You are the quad father. And at first he was...
The quad father.
Yeah. At first he was a little sketched out about it, kind of like, well, don't say that. And I'm like, why? Chris, I'm comfortable with it. You need to be comfortable with it.
At one point, it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. At one point, I was a shell of a person that was really, you know, going down the tubes. And so was Mark. I mean, we both went through these different, you know, phases. And now, everything's great.
You really have adjusted, haven't you? Completely.
Got to. Otherwise, you can't live life to its fullest.
Frank, my first question is a medical one. Can those who play quad rugby do any further damage to limbs that are already paralyzed or impaired?
The joke amongst the guys is, when they see somebody get hit and knocked over, is, what are you going to do, break our neck? In other words, we've already done the worst. Obviously, they can suffer some kind of bumps and bruises, but generally speaking, no.
Yeah. You talked about Mark Zupan playing club quad rugby. How widespread is this game? I mean, a lot of guys
it's amazing. I mean, you would think how many quadriplegics can be playing a sport like this, have the ability. There was something like 60 clubs at the absolute peak. It's down now because the game has gotten so much better that certain people can't qualify. And as we say, it's in 36
And
countries.
these wheelchairs are considerably different than what we'd normally see on the street.
Oh, these things look like something out of a movie, a gladiator movie. They're all sorts of iron on the sides and things like that. They're not the usual sort of thing that somebody who's paralyzed would use.
Yeah. Bottom line this for me. I mean, are we supposed to admire these guys, or are we supposed to just view them as just any other jockstrap?
Well, the movie that's coming out next month, where we used a lot of the footage, goes into much more detail about that. And their attitude is, no, you should not admire us. We're just jocks like anybody else. But I think any normal person, and by the way, they call normal people like you and me ABs, able-bodied, yeah. And they call themselves gimps, which tells you a lot right there. Amongst themselves, they're gimps. They do not want to be admired, but I think, gosh, we have to admire somebody who's that handicapped to do what they do.
It's nice stuff. Frank, thanks. Right now, the college